Welcome to another episode of Fullcourt Passport. I'm Ric Bucher. That is Bostjan, Boki, Nachbar. And we are joined by a special guest, Rachel Galligan. She's a former D1 women's basketball standout at Eastern Illinois University. She's a three-time Hall of Famer. Not once, three-time Hall of Famer, former professional, former D1 collegiate coach. Since 2015, she's been working as a basketball color analyst with a variety of outlets covering women's college basketball. She's also a former WNBA analyst. And perhaps most important and most interesting to our fans here on Fullcourt Passport, she's the CEO and owner of global women's basketball scouting service called Go Global Recruiting, also an NCAA scout, also a WNBA scout. Rachel, did I miss anything? That might be the longest intro that we've had on this show to date.
I apologize. It's a mouthful. I always joke with people. The only thing I haven't done is be a referee. So it takes a minute.
Well, I've done that, and I would suggest that you leave that off of the bucket list.
That's the plan. That's the plan so far.
Can you describe the state of women's basketball here in the U.S. and the world right now?
Whew. I guess I would say as popular as it's ever been. I think when you look at it, my perspective being in the States right now and really immersed in that world, there's definitely a ton of excitement here. You see the growth. I think we've talked about the growth, not just in the last couple of years, but I would say in the last 5 to 8 years. It's really taken a jump, especially from the NCAA side of things. Even the grassroots game has grown and evolved, and the resources in that have grown. Then you look at the WNBA, and you look at players like Caitlin Clark. You've elevated the game to a whole other level, and the Asia Wilsons, Brianna Stewart's. I think the popularity of the WNBA is as high as it's ever been. You got a lot of media and outlets wanting to invest in it. And right now there's more money than there's ever been in it. And we're at a pivotal time right now, especially with the WNBA and the CBA negotiations. There's going to be even more money. And now you look at the competition of different leagues all over the world. You just feel like this is a wave that everybody wants to be a part of, one way, shape, or form, and that there's options. There's more options now than there ever have been.
You mentioned an important pivotal point, especially when it comes to WNBA. Coming from the Player Association angle, I'm definitely keeping a close watch on how that negotiations are going. It looks like the WNBA is at that pivotal point. And what do you think are some of the biggest issues that the league is facing right now? And how do you think in general this negotiation and the CBA is going to play out?
I think you have Unrivaled. Now these aren't competing leagues directly with the WNBA because the seasons are different, but you're having leagues that are investing way more than what the WNBA has historically been able to invest. And so that's just raising the bar and kind of just putting pressure, I think, on the WNBA a little bit. Unrivaled, the 3-on-3 league getting ready to enter into a second year. Now there's Project B that's making a lot of waves, especially through Europe, and going to be competing against, EuroLeague, EuroCup. I mean, there's just so much going on. But then you look at the WNBA, which is kind of in a league of its own, obviously, going on through the summertime into the late spring, into the fall. I think this is a pivotal time, and there's a lot of discourse around it right now because they've had to kind of postpone, and they haven't quite agreed, and they're extending the conversations. They're not quite there yet. What does that mean? People are wondering, are we even going to have a season? Are we going to meet an agreement? I personally think we will. I think we're getting really close. One of the biggest things is, and everyone's going to start with the salaries, and all that really comes down to, from the player's perspective, is a more fair revenue share, which is closer to what the NBA is making. They're not arguing for money like the NBA players. They're just arguing for the same percentage of revenue share in that. So I think there's been a few reportings about what that looked like, over $1 million now for the max, what that could potentially mean. Now they're going back and forth. The most recent reporting has been, okay, they might do away with player housing, which is interesting. That's something that's kind of they've always provided because the summertime and the shorter season has been something that they provided. Now they're talking about potentially doing a combine, a mandatory type of combine, but it really does start with the salaries. We will see an exponential growth in those salaries. Is it what the players want? It's kind of hard. I've always struggled personally because there's not a ton of transparency when it comes down to what are the actual numbers. What is the WNBA truly profiting? Whether that's through the NBA or whether that's who's actually holding those numbers, it's really hard. There's not a lot of transparency, I'll be completely honest. But they want more revenue sharing. I could talk about this topic forever. And one of the biggest things is just steadier benefits, retirement types of benefits, including medical coverage, and the facilities. I think we're getting to a point now where nobody wants to practice in a community center with a 12-year-old basketball team. There needs to be investment from ownership groups with true facilities, true locker rooms, true resources from a training table, from a food and a nourishment standpoint. I don't think the players are going to settle for anything less than that. And I agree with that one. That one's a big one for me, is the investment in just the facilities and the resources for the best players in the world to be the very best.
Welcome to the NBA.
Yeah.
The lack of transparency in terms of what the real numbers are and how much money is being made and how much is being referred to as basketball revenue. I've been covering the league for 30 some years, and I had these fights with David Stern going back, the late, great David Stern, in terms of how it was being phrased or framed publicly. They would call it a player strike. And I'm like, it's not a player strike. You haven't put any offer on the table for the players to agree to.
Right.
They can't go to work because there's nothing on the table for them to agree to. I would say this, just from my experience, and this is 2 cents for the directors of the players union in getting a deal done. The things that you mentioned about nutrition and the fringe elements, I know there's a lot of focus on the money, but your best chance of making progress and getting things better is to get those ancillary things in place. And I think Boki can probably speak to this from your experience with the EuroLeague. Getting teams and the league to agree to better conditions, playing conditions, is something they are more likely to buy into because it benefits the overall product
of the entire league. Yeah.
Right. The money is just money going out the door as they see it, right? And let's face it, they have all the leverage in the world. They can always say, look, where are you going to make money if we don't have a season? The owners are like, we got tons of ways to make money outside of this. This is not for the most part, our livelihood. And so it's kind of recognizing the reality of the situation and finding where you can take advantage of your leverage.
Yeah, I definitely find it interesting. I think the players are being tougher than ever. I'm not obviously in the negotiations, but they're prepared to really fight for this.
That's good.
Whatever this is, I think that they're not going to settle, and I appreciate that. What they're asking for is not unreasonable, at least from a financial standpoint. And I personally believe the league is profiting more than what people historically have talked about it being.
There's no question about that. It's the same stance for the NBA.
Yep.
To be honest with you. Yep. I mean, as much as players make, they should be making more based on the revenue that they produce.
Yep.
That's the reality.
Yep.
And before we talk about NBA, or in this case WNBA, I mean, there's previous stages, right? You have collegiate basketball, you have international development systems. How does U.S. development of young female players, women's players, compare to international? Like when you, as a scout, when you look at an American player, when you look at an international player, what differences have you seen? What similarities have you seen? How is it different in that sense when we're talking about young players before that stage of becoming professionals?
My opinion on that probably changes by the year. The more I see the different areas of the world that I dive deeper into and really have a better understanding. And I'm not perfect in that. I've done this for 17 years, but there's always something new that's changing my mind. One thing that I think when I say European, I focus very heavily in Europe. I think that from a grassroots perspective, I have a lot of respect from youth development in like a lot of countries, Spain, France, across the board. I think that there is an understanding and maybe just a natural draw that I have to the international game, the style of play. When you look at America and you look at our grassroots, talking middle school to high school to AAU, sometimes it can be so individualized. It's one-on-one and one mixtape tour. Like some of that stuff, I think over time I've become just like, I don't like it. It's insufferable. I like the spacing and the team element of a more European style of basketball. And I think that to a certain extent, players who are 16, 17, 18 years old, when I'm going over there and looking at these players and scouting these players, they have a better overall basketball IQ because of just those elements that they've just been instilled in them from a young age. Spacing, cutting, movement, all those types of things. That is a beautiful thing that European basketball does a better job at in some ways than we do at our grassroots. Now,
has that evolved? Because I'm really curious. Like if I look at collegiate basketball, my daughter is playing her 5th year now. She redshirted as a freshman, and every team that she's been on, at least half the roster has been international players. One year she was the only American on the team. And so the way I look at that is the attraction of players playing overseas and how they play is much greater than the best or most American players. I'm just wondering if that is a recent development or it's kind of been that way for a while.
I think you've had people who've been very good in the space. One of them, Jose Fernandez, for example, was just recently named the head coach of the Dallas Wings in the WNBA, built his entire program and his entire legacy on understanding the global game and going and getting players overseas that he couldn't get here, or he just didn't like here, or they didn't get his style here, and then developing them and then helping them go be really highly successful pros. It has gotten more popular out of college coaches. I see it firsthand all the time. Who actually wants to do it and invest in it is a different conversation, but I think it's appealing because twofold. That style and that blend of style and skill and team element, and I'll be honest, there's less of an entitlement that I think coaches are drawn to. If you talk to a lot of coaches over the last 5 to 10 years, that's been a common theme. Just the mentality of a player overseas is different sometimes than an American player, a high-level American player. There's also the element of it's become more desirable over here for international players to want to come because of the transfer portal and mainly because of NIL right now. Sure. Sure we'll talk about that later, but back to what you were saying. When it gets to this point where you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, and players are kind of sitting here making a decision, okay, they've already peaked maybe in their area, their region, their country, they're with their national team. Are we going to go the collegiate system or are we going to go the pro system? Some of them aren't quite prepared to make that decision at 18 or 19 years old. So they stay home and they stay within kind of that system, that professional system. And then maybe they kind of realize a little bit later, I'm starting to see a lot of this at maybe 20, 21. This isn't going the way I wanted it to go. I'm not being developed. I don't have the resources or the facilities to.
This is internationally.
I'm not seeing myself progress and make that jump the way I thought I would make that jump. And that's where I think right now, in December of 2025, the collegiate system is really appealing. And it's not just the NIL. I know everybody thinks everybody wants to come for the money. Yes, obviously that's a huge part of this. We can't ignore it. But when you boil it down, what we have in the States from an NCAA perspective with our facilities, with our resources, the training room, the gear, the way they travel, the way they're taken care of. I mean, the way that they live. I mean,
it's all higher level.
It's unmatched globally. You have everything you need to succeed as a young woman and get better and be pushed against the best of the best every single night. And really, it's on you at that point, And so the NCAA system is like, you walk in these gyms, they've got multiple facilities, multiple gyms and courts, all the guns in the world, all the shot tracking technology, 15 training. I mean, it's amazing what these women can have. Like, okay, you've got all these resources in the world now, dive into it. And also you have these 15 coaches on a staff now, who pull one aside and let's come up with a developmental plan. Now, last thing I'll say about that, because I get on my high horse, I am not sitting here saying NCAA is the end-all be-all. There are great places who are great at developing, and there are those who say they do and they don't. I think the biggest thing is with an international player who is kind of in that in-between and wondering what they want to do. If they're going to come to the States and go to college, they've got to be really thorough and careful about who is truly going to develop them and get them to that next level, because just because it's the USA doesn't mean you're going to get that. I think that there are top programs that can do that.
And since you're talking about developing, I wanted to ask you one question just to see if you've noticed. What I've noticed is with international players and the emphasis on the team play that you mentioned, sometimes I feel that the individual development has lacked a little bit, meaning the free style of play, the one-on-one skill, which we see from American players more. Have you maybe noticed that as well, that players from Europe are, sure, they understand the tactics, the schemes, defensive schemes, all that, but individually they won't be able to do things that maybe on average, let's say, American players could do?
Yeah, it's actually a great point. Maybe one that I haven't necessarily thought about is just like, okay, it's like they both can come together and help one another. That's the beauty of both of it. It's not like, okay, one is better than the other, America versus the global game, or, European. They're both different, but, and I always tell people, like, who's coming from Europe, don't lose those elements of who you are and what you've learned, and come here and start, changing all of that. Who you are and the way you've developed and the way you see the game, it makes you unique and special. But you can come here, and like you said, those individual skills, being able to really expand, that's probably what we're really good at the right places. And so I think that they can work together, and that's the beauty of kind of having this whole global approach of a player. If I was a player right now, that's what I would want to have. I would want to have this global experience of playing in both areas.
Yeah. We've seen in the NBA the rise of international talent at every level, coach, player, GM, etc. I don't know that we've seen that in the WNBA. And I'm wondering, is that something that is coming, or why haven't we seen it to this point?
I think you've seen it a little bit. A little bit. And it's kind of hit or miss. There's a common theme, when you talk to people in the WNBA, are they going to come? They don't want to come over. We're not going to waste our money and resources to really scout the international game because they're never going to come. Well, that's not true. You can't just push a broad stroke across an entire globe and say that that's the case. The difficult thing with the WNBA has always been when their season is, when are the seasons lining up with each other? They came out with a rule in the last CBA about prioritization and making sure you were here at the start of training camp, and that being important, which I agree. I'm a big believer in that. It made the product, trust me, in the first month of the season much better than what it was before. But now, you have leagues that run later, and so it's kind of, from that standpoint, from a WNBA front office standpoint, I can understand why there was concerns. I don't know how appealing it was for an international player to come over here as a rookie and make $26,000. Now, I think that's changed because of the growth of the global game, because of the exposure of the global game. They're making more money. Every CBA, that financial incentive has gone up, and this one will be, in my opinion, the most historic jump we've seen yet. And so that's more desirable. I just had this conversation recently with somebody in the league. I think there's a shift from a mentality standpoint of this younger generation of international players who maybe it's as simple as exposure. Social media, finally being able to feel like this is a league, the greatest league in the world, and we want to be a part of it. And this is something that's always been a dream. I mean, when I talked to players 5 years ago, they had very little understanding. When I talk to players now, they can rattle off names. They have at least a basic understanding of, the history of the league or what's going on in this league. And so I think that all the elements that we've spent talking this whole time have really played into that. But I think we're starting to see more and more players who want to come over here. And you saw it last year in the league. Look at the Golden State Valkyries. I mean, three-fourths of their team was international. Phoenix Mercury brought over a ton of international talent. The New York Liberty done a great job. I think there needs to be, from a WNBA league perspective, there needs to be better cultivation of relationships. And that's one of my biggest things where I feel like we're just missing, like the relationship element of really getting to know people and really getting to understand what this league has to offer and what it means to come play for that team or that person or that front office.
Yeah, when you're talking about this, it kind of reminds me, and I don't want to sound too negative about it, but it reminds me of the NBA maybe 20 years ago or 25 years ago. I think WNBA is going to catch up internationally very quickly, or is catching up already. But I remember that pre-social media time where there was a real disconnect between understanding players in Europe and knowing them and knowing their personalities and tracking them. And it seems like, and I'm not an expert in this, you are, but it seems like the WM or just women's basketball, American women's basketball, is catching up with that at a very rapid pace over the last maybe 5 years or so, or 10 years or so. If you look only at the last WNBA draft, like the players, international players getting selected in the first round, I think you'll potentially see more of that just because that angle that of sight is being like amplified now with the addition of international basketball.
Well, and even France. France used to be a country that was really difficult to convince to come over, one way, shape, or form, whether it was college, whether it was professionally. I mean, Dominique Malonga, coming over and like has made it a point that she is going to be a key player in the WNBA. That was groundbreaking for all this younger generation of players who know who she is. And now she's at Seattle and she's all about this now. I mean, there's a ton of players that are really seriously now we look at the draft for next year, and some of these younger players, Awa Fam, who, for instance, from Spain, who's really high level. I mean, she's openly talked about, yeah, I want to come. And that's the first question that front offices are going to ask. Well, is she actually going to want to come?
Yeah.
She wants to come. She's made it known. So I think we really are feeling a shift and just that desire and that true want to now to come over here. And now you kind of wonder, what does a league like Project B mean? Where does EuroLeague or Eurocup, is that as desirable? If now there's this competitive league of like an Unrivaled and a Project B, does like the winter time become more watered down? I'm not sure. I haven't analyzed it enough, but it's just really fascinating.
Yeah. Put the business side to the side in terms of the WNBA. What do you think is the greatest issue facing the league right now as far as the quality of the product?
They've got to expand the rosters. I'm a huge proponent of roster expansion. I mean, they've expanded teams at a blistering pace over the last, year and a half or 2 years. I'm actually still in shock that they've expanded the teams as much as they have. I am a huge proponent for roster expansion. Right now it's 12. A lot of them are only carrying 11 because of the cap. You see after about a month and a half into the season, people get hurt. Then we're going into hardship contracts. They're pulling people off the street who lives local that week maybe was at training camp that can come in. It's just ridiculous, I'll be honest, at this point. So I feel like, to me, that's one of the number one things I'm a huge proponent. It's just roster expansion. And if it's not roster expansion, maybe some sort of developmental, I don't even know what they call it in the NBA, like a secondary team or secondary option, something that they can pull from.
Not a full G League, but
that's in their
a junior team.
Yeah, a junior team or something that is just like, we're not just pulling people out of left and right and the product is suffering. So I would love to see roster expansion, and I think that just naturally provides into more player development, which...
Of course, Rachel, that what we're talking about is more, and that is always the challenge. Again, you could possibly get roster expansion, but you may not get the overall money that you want for the top players. And I saw it with the NBA where it was structured where the very top players are getting a huge cut of the money. And I don't know that it served the NBA well taking that approach. I think it's better if you have a stronger, sort of like the world at large, if you have a stronger middle class, you're overall better. I don't know how the WNBA Players Association is handling this, but I hope that they take some cues from what we've seen happen with the NBA and approach it as like, let's try to help as many players as we can.
Right.
As opposed to let's try to get this number up there for the absolute best.
Without being in the room and just studying the league, as long as I have that would be my perception of what they are trying to do and what they're trying to fight for. Oh, with also the understanding of just the product has to get better. And that includes the facilities. You can't have certain ownership groups that are operating on a budget because that's just what they've always done. And they've been able to have success operating on a budget. You've got to be able to push there's just some franchises people don't want to be at because they're practicing in the worst facilities. They do the bare minimum. I mean, you've got to hold some of these ownership groups accountable.
Yeah.
And so I think from an ownership and an investment standpoint, that bar needs to rise. From a league standpoint, one thing, prioritization, again, I am a fan of it, even though it does get complicated because, they go overseas to make a lot of their money. You have to respect that and understand that is going to be an element of this. But I personally am a fan of roster expansion. It's to a point where if we just keep adding in all these other areas, the day in, day out product on the television is still not going to even be close to what it could be because we just have too many injuries.
Yep.
Rachel, before we let you go, I just want to touch on something that I know is close to you, and we talk occasionally about this, which is the transfer portal, the NIL. If I go back to the collegiate basketball, and we don't have to go too much into it, but maybe for some players or some parents or some agents or somebody that is listening to this, like you've seen obviously the positive stories, but you've seen a lot of negative stories also. Is there a advice, a recommendation you would give to all these people who could potentially be in these situations of changing the teams or looking for NIL deals and some of the traps that are out there?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would give advice is like, remember, and at the core of what this is, if you're really considering coming to the States and playing in our NCAA or collegiate system, start with the fit. At the end of the day, you're still a young athlete. You're still getting an education. You're still going to be with a certain coaches and a team that are going to become like your family. You need to find a place that's going to help you not just grow basketball-wise, but also personally, academically. These are young women we're talking about. Don't just...
So how do you do that? I agree with you, but if you're a parent or you're a player and you're looking at all these different offers, like how do you go out? Because they're all going to say there's a lot of what you want to hear, right? How do you figure out, or how do you identify, this is the place for me?
I think it's just like anything you research or anything that you look into in relationship building. If you're going to just think you're going to have one conversation or go on a 2-day visit and think you're going to know people, that's not the case. I think you have to really invest in relationships and get to know these coaching staffs. Relationships are still such a big part of this, even though sometimes, especially during the transfer portal, we have to make quick decisions. But like, invest in the relationship, really understand, okay, what is your plan for me? Show me your developmental plan. Do research on the town, on the city, on the coach. Look into the university. What are the different populations of student body or the crime rates? You've got to educate yourself.
Yeah.
What
about talking to previous players that have been in that program, or even previous parents of players who have been in that program?
Yeah, there's always somebody that you can connect with. And I love when girls talk with previous players or someone who's currently in the system, because I think you get a really honest perspective. And then the cool thing is they are allowed to do official visits. And I'm a huge fan of the official visits where they can pay to bring your family over late in the process. And this is kind of the final decision-making thing. You get to spend an amount of time, 48 hours, couple days at an institution, have meals together, sit down in the offices together, really try to envision, is this a place I want to be? Is this a place that I could see myself? Is this a place I could leave my daughter for the next year, 2, 3 years? The official visits are a really big part of that if you're lucky enough to have that opportunity. But it's all about asking the right questions, connecting with the right people, doing the right research. But again, it's never a perfect thing. And then we do have the transfer portal, and it is easier now for players to make a move and to make a change. I mean, maybe I'm old school. I played for 4 years and I loved the name across my chest. There was a loyalty that I felt to that process. It's changed now a little bit, but I would say consistency breeds growth. I like the consistent element, and that's my goal, is to try to help players find a place where they can be at for a consistent amount of time. It's really difficult to meet your potential if you're making a move every single year. I'm sorry, I just don't believe in that.
No.
So, and then, if you find the right fit, and if you're insulated in the right situation and you're thriving and you continue to thrive and you grow, the money is going to come.
Sure.
The money will continue to come. So obviously I believe highly in the NIL. I'm glad that we can help families and pay players, and this can be something that we're talking about now. I don't know that it's smart to make it the only thing. I think you got to look at the total picture when you make these decisions.
Agreed.
Awesome.
All right, Rachel, listen, thank you so much. This was very enlightening, informative. Appreciate all of the time and the insight. And I'm sure we will be circling back at some point again. And the resume will probably be longer by then, but we'll handle it.
Thank you, guys. I had a blast. Obviously, I can talk about this all day. So thank you for having me on.
Of course. Until next time. Yeah.
All right, guys.
Bye.
All right, man, a lot to get into. One of the things that I just know from my experience that really threw things sideways going into the transfer portal and the NIL and all of that is that COVID happened right before that happened. And so you had this whole legion of players, women high school basketball players, who weren't seen in the same way or scouted in the same way. And so everybody was just grabbing the first offer they could get. They were just looking for how do I go play collegiate basketball? Who's offering me something? Oh, they are. I'm going to take it.
That's so different. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and so that's why there was all this movement, because so many people landed in places that they were like, oh, I'm on the other side of the country. Oh, they don't play the system that fits my style. And then you had all this other movement happen. And I think we're still kind of rebounding from that a little bit, in that everybody has had a more difficult time finding their place.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is like that's so different to what we're used to in Europe, where you have a completely different system of growing up in a club, and then maybe at some point, if you'll find a way out of that structure, let's say, you'll have one or two options, maybe, right? Or you're just going to stay with your club until you're a pro and so on. And especially, I'm talking about women's basketball. I think here you have a completely different kind of world where you finish high school, right? And then it's like open, it's like free for all, almost, right? Especially if you're a talented player. And it's kind of scary almost in a way. Like Rachel said, like, you as a player or a parent or whoever like is around that player needs to really take time to educate themselves and to get to know what you're doing, because you could easily make a mistake and try to correct that mistake through transfer portal, which is like open every year, which is something from our side in Europe like almost unheard of, that players would be changing teams, youth players, young players would be changing teams every year. It doesn't happen.
And,
so
and you see it in high school too now.
Routinely.
And my daughter went through it. Like there was, I'd like to say, you stay loyal and you do this and you don't change or whatever. We had special circumstances because her high school coach was also her AAU coach, basically recruited her to that high school. Mm-hmm. And then the parents decided, not this parent, the other parents wanted that coach fired because they thought essentially as an AAU coach, she wasn't taking the team all over the country to play in all these tournaments, and they wanted their daughter seen. And it was like, the coach played at Stanford. She was an All-American. Like, she studied film. She was a great coach. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Your priorities are in the wrong place. And so when they fired her, I was like, we need to go to another program, because this program's done now for the next 2 years. My daughter still had 2 years of high school left, and she's now moved around college-wise, but it's always been what it comes down to. What I've learned about this, and I write about this in the book that I have coming out in May about the value of being coachable, is that there are too many parents and players who, when they are challenged or when they are told that, hey, you're not good enough at this to play here, they go find another program that's not going to make that demand of them. Mm-hmm. And they end up shortcutting themselves, because eventually those weaknesses are going to show up.
They're going to pop up for sure.
And so it really comes down to, I think, in handling, like, I think the transfer portal is valuable because coaches move and programs change, and players should have that flexibility, and the NIL is a nice addition to it. But it really comes down to your motives. In terms of making a change. Why are you making a change?
For sure.
Because you think you should be getting more money, or because you think you should have a different role. Like all the athletes in my book, they were challenged at some point.
You have to be if you want to grow. I mean, it's the only way. Yeah.
And but rather than like dodge the challenge, they faced it head on and recognized, this is what I need to do different in order to be successful. And they all look back at that now and say, that was such a valuable lesson for me, because I learned how to face an obstacle and attack it and overcome it. And the confidence that I got from that as a result is something that I've utilized every day since, that has allowed me to grow.
Definitely.
Right?
I mean, at the end of the day, that's what basketball is, and any kind of sport. It's a life learning tool at the same time as it is a sport. And I think people who realize that for young people, I think that's difficult at times. But for parents who realize that they're ahead of the game, I think, because it's not just a sport. There's so many more elements that you learn from it. Especially in team sport, especially in a team sport, I think way more, obviously. So it's much more than that, for sure.
No, agreed. All right. So I want to go to the game of the week because it wasn't just the game of the week. It was Partizan Bayern. Partizan ends up winning, going away after falling behind early. But I have so many questions for you, Boki. This is where we turn the tables. You have to be more of the reporter than me in this instance, because the atmosphere, it didn't seem like the players were being supported by the home crowd. There were empty seats. It was an extraordinary thing to see at a Partizan game and the reaction of the crowd. So help me understand what exactly was going on there with the fans of Partizan.
Yeah, I want to, I want to say I'm not obviously in that locker room, so I'm not, let's say, fully informed or fully aware of the things, how they went down. But I'll just give it a brief, let's say, superficial description of what happened, and then we can discuss a little bit more of what happened in the game itself. But basically, the legendary coach, Željko Obradović, who many people, many players, many former players, including myself, has the biggest possible respect for. I mean, he's a guy that is so respected that for me, it's hard to compare it to any other coach in Europe in the past. But basically, long story short, the results were not there. The pressure was mounting, and he decided to step down. And that was huge. That was a huge surprise, because when you think about Partizan, you think about Željko Obradović as this legendary coach. I mean, it's like they're one. And the reaction of fans once he stepped down, and I'm not going to go into all the details how it happened and all this, but the reaction of the fans in that game was just that, basically blaming management, blaming even the players for what happened. And many people still believe that should have never happened, that the solution for this team going forward was not to change the coach or to coach to step down. The issues have been different, have been others, the way the team was managed, how the players were selected, and so on. And I think this is definitely something that is so different than to what we're used to, that in one of the most passionate basketball fan environments, you would have a situation where the home crowd would not support its own team in a game, basically almost turn against them.
Yeah.
It was sad to see. We were watching the game at home, and it made me emotional. It made my wife emotional. My youngest daughter, who watches these games and is a Partizan fan, in general, just she supports other teams as well, but Partizan has always been one of her top teams. We were like, it was difficult to watch, to be honest. And I would not like to be in the shoes of those players who are there. And the one thing that I was really worried about personally was that there's going to be an incident, not just towards the players, but just something in the arena. You don't want to see that. And luckily that didn't happen, nothing major at least. It's going to be interesting to see how the team moves on from here and who's going to be the next coach and how they pick up. They did win the game against Bayern. They played well in the second half, and they pulled it off. But I can only imagine it was not an easy game for the players to play.
You could tell that they were fighting against the crowd, and especially the American players. I got the sense like they kind of rebelled against the crowd. And, guys are dunking the ball and adding a little bit more to it. And normally they would be doing that for the team, and generally I don't even see that as much in EuroLeague when guys dunk. Like they don't, but I felt like there was a little added to it, and that was in response to the crowd not being supportive.
True, but you know what? At the end of the day, Partizan players and the fans are in this together now, whether they like it or not. Like that's where they are. The contracts in EuroLeague are guaranteed. Like you can't just say bye to the player like you used to say, maybe 10, 20 years ago, where you could find a reason to terminate a contract and then you would go to the court and fight about it. Like nowadays, that's not so easy from the club's perspective. So they're in this together. Like if a player wants to leave and if a club doesn't want him now, and maybe they can work on a termination of the contract and find a solution. But that's tough. That's not going to be easy. So they're in this together. Like the sooner they realize it's like, hey, we have to move forward together, the better it is for the team and for the fans. And hopefully that does happen with the addition of a new coach that comes in, who I don't know who he will be at this point. It might be revealed soon. But they have still, I don't know, 25 games ahead of them or something like this, 20 games in EuroLeague or a little bit more. We're not even halfway through the season. So basketball is going to have to be played, period.
Yeah. It's interesting in looking at their roster and looking at Obradović leaving, and the fans feeling that the players on some level are culpable for Obradović stepping down, right? And I hate to point out, but Jabari Parker lost his spot in the NBA in large part because of a lot of the things that I saw in this particular game against Bayern. Just the lack of attention to detail, the body language, the something goes wrong and now I'm looking to blame one of my teammates. That's something that I never see in EuroLeague. And so when I think about Partizan and their reputation, and I think about Obradović and his reputation, I almost can sympathize with the fans to a certain extent to say, you built a roster that's really not what I'm used to thinking Partizan is. And I can, as much as I hate to see players face this, I'm not being supported by my own fans. I can understand why the fans might feel that way about this particular team.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into decision making and the way this team was put together and how and why and so on. That's on the team, obviously, that's on the club to comment. But I will say this, and I think these guys now, if they haven't realized so far, the players, they're realizing now they play in front of one of the loudest fans in the world, sure, but the fans in Serbia are also one of the most educated fans you will ever find in the world, in any arena.
They recognize
basketball.
Is.
They know when somebody messes up defensively. They know when somebody doesn't make an extra pass.
They're not impressed by somebody just scoring 25 points.
No, they value real European basketball. And you got to fit into that system and you got to understand the environment you're playing in. So again, I really do hope so that this team is going to pull together. I know some of those guys. They're great guys. They're not malicious. They're not negative or bad in any way.
Yeah.
They just got to come together, and they need a new leadership, obviously. And there's still a lot of talent there. And to me, it would be nothing better than to see that team turning around for the city of Belgrade, for the fans of Partizan. And at the end of the day, having a season they can be proud of. So there's still time, but the clock is ticking, obviously.
Yeah. All right. I want to get to one last thing, and I want to address it because it's from one of our listeners, and it's an interesting question that he had before we go. We were asked about the possible development, because we're seeing so many international players coming into the NBA, the possible development of the NBA starting some sort of development program in Europe.
I think that the question was more aimed at if NBA Europe does happen in the way that some people believe it will happen, which is going to be the strongest league in Europe, which I personally think there's a lot that has to happen before that ever develops, but that's a different conversation. I think the question is aimed whether we're going to have like Celtics or Lakers or somebody have like an under 17 team or under 15 team in Europe. And
so just looking at it more isolated in terms of like, is there an NBA team that's going to get smart and try to get ahead of the curve?
Right, correct.
And create a program overseas where they can pick off, cherry pick talent.
I mean, to me, that the answer to this, and I think it's more of a fantasy type of question, but I like it. I think it's interesting. It makes you think. To me, that's my answer to this is very simple. Is like that cannot happen until you have a draft, because draft is a lottery. Basically, teams can pick any player they want, right? So if you would have your own youth system, like that means that you would choose from that system. And what about the draft, right?
So you're saying there would have to be a EuroLeague draft.
No, I'm saying that the NBA draft, if the Lakers would have an NBA would have a draft pick, like how does it work then? If you have your own farm system, like are you going to pick only from that farm system? Like you know what I mean? Like it's kind of weird to have a draft where you're selecting all kinds of players from all the world, but at the same time you have your own farm system or your own youth system. It doesn't really make sense to me. And I think as long as there's draft and there's kind of like a free for all choice of who you're going to choose, I don't think having your own system makes sense, or vice versa. Why would Lakers have, and I'm just giving Lakers and Celtics as an example, like why would Lakers have their own youth system if Celtics can pick their player in the draft?
Very true.
Why would you then develop? And that's kind of what we in Europe are feeling at times, which is exactly that. The clubs in Europe develop players and then have somebody else basically come in, drafts the players and quote unquote takes them. Of course, for buyouts, for good salary and all this, but it still feels kind of like, hey, I've developed this player for years.
And now you're taking him.
Now you're taking him. And what I get in return, is that really a valuable return in a form of a buyout? If that player develops to be an all-star player and is making bajillions in the NBA, meanwhile I've received like less than $1 million of compensation, doesn't really fit. But again, that's a completely different conversation. So, but one thing I do want to touch on, because it does connect both NBA, EuroLeague, and the last game against Bayern and Partizan, is what Spencer Dinwiddie said after the game, when he was asked by journalists how does he compare NBA and EuroLeague, and he made the very interesting observation, something I didn't think about before, but I'm going to totally steal it from him from now on, which is, he said, it's like if you're a dancer, and some dancers can be good at salsa, some dancers can be good at ballet, and some can do both.
Yeah.
But some can only do one, and it's I think it's a great analogy. It's so good. Like, all the basketball players are dancers in that sense, but only some can do both different dances, and some will fit only in one and some will fit only in other. And that's so much related to what we spoke about in the past, Rick, when we said not every American player that comes to Europe will succeed here. And of course, not every European player that's going to go to the NBA is going to succeed also.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. And Rachel touched on that as well. The game is different, but it can mesh together and it can fit. But it's not for everybody to fit in both.
I would also add that what I think we're seeing is, if you're going to be an international team and you're going to sign an American player, understanding what their motivation is and how they approach the game of basketball is incredibly vital. That the Kevin Punters who feel like they always have something to prove, or a Kyle Hines, those are the guys that are going to be able to make the adjustment. And that the players who have a feeling like, this is who I am, and they expect everybody else to adapt to them, that doesn't have to be a discovery once they join your team. If you watch them, how they play other places and how they interact with their teams, I think you get a good feel for somebody who's willing to recognize, like Kyle Hines said, you said, why were you no longer the leading scorer? He's like, Casey Jacobson was better than I was. I recognized that. And I was like, I got to find another way to contribute.
That's so true.
Not every player has that mindset, or they might recognize it, but then they don't have the willingness to say, I'm going to put everything I can into this other aspect of the game, because I still want to play and I still want to contribute. And if I'm not a star, it's okay, because I want to be part of something bigger than myself.
Yeah.
That to me is what you have to, like, if you can figure that out, that's the guy you want, as opposed to the guy who has to have things a certain way, no matter how talented they might be.
For sure. And the question here is, why do they need to figure this out? And I'll tell you why. Because the player in Europe, or more specifically in EuroLeague, is viewed differently. Is viewed, how can you fit into the system we have and play 15 minutes, play 20 minutes, maybe 25 as max, but not the 30, 35 you thought you will, or you might be used to from other leagues. Here it's about the fit, and it's about how I can add my piece of the puzzle to the whole team play that we have, which will hopefully help us win the championship. So it's not like the other way around, like you have in the NBA, where it's like, hey, who's the next superstar? Who's the next Anthony Edwards, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, whatever name you want me to throw out, which one player that we can build around. It's completely the opposite. It's the system and which players can fit into the system. So it's totally reverse,
Yeah. All right. We've covered just about all we can, and yet we left some on the table, because there's still what's going on with EuroLeague teams and potential 10-year licenses to make a commitment to the EuroLeague, with the NBA league, EuroLeague idea hovering out there. But that gives us plenty to talk about next week, along with everything else that's going on in the EuroLeague, because it seems to never disappoint in giving us more drama. Boki, always good to see you. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us. And we'll do this again next week.
See you next time.